with our guest presenter, Shawn LeMons. My name is Samantha Lichten. I'm a Building Electrification Program Administrator with the City and County of Denver Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency, focused on trade and industry relations. And I am very excited to be facilitating today's webinar. A couple of housekeeping items just before we get started. Everyone is muted, but we welcome questions in the Q&A box throughout the next hour. We will answer those questions after our speaker presents. Hoy tenemos servicios de traducción. Para escuchar a este webinar en español, haga clic en el globo y seleccione Spanish. Lastly, recordings in English and Spanish will be posted on Denver's High Performance Buildings and Homes webinar library and sent out to all the registrants in the next week. Before we dive into our main content, I just wanted to give you a status update on heat pump requirements and programs in the City and County of Denver. With the updated Energize Denver ordinance, we are already seeing changes to permitting processes for HVAC equipment in all commercial and multifamily buildings. As of March 1st this year, the permitting process has changed for standard space and water heating equipment, like unitary AC, condensing units serving a heated space, gas furnaces, and gas hot water heaters. Those will now go through a review by Community Planning and Development, similar to the existing CPD review process for heat pumps, and compliance includes completing a report on cost feasibility of electrification. No equipment changes are required yet. Starting in 2025, those easy to electrify products, unitary AC units, gas furnaces, gas hot water heaters, must be replaced with an electric alternative at end of system life if it is cost effective to do so. Your equipment is also exempt if it's for an emergency replacement. In 2025, permitting requirements will also change for harder to electrify equipment types like PTACs, VTACs, boilers, and central hot water systems. Compliance similarly includes completing a cost feasibility analysis of electrification, but replacement is not yet required. Starting 2027, all gas-fired space and water heating and cooling equipment must be replaced with an electric alternative. Again, there are exceptions for systems where it is not cost-effective to electrify and when it is an emergency replacement. Cost-effective here is defined as within 15% the cost of a like-for-like replacement, including all incentives and social cost of carbon. To help meet these requirements, the City and County of Denver is offering multiple resources and incentives to contractors and building owners who make the move to electric equipment. We have three main offerings on the commercial and multifamily side. We are currently accepting buildings into a pilot program designed to figure out what it takes to electrify commercial buildings in our community. Participation in the pilot covers up to 100% of the cost of heat pump equipment. In particular, we are looking for hospital, hotel, dormitory, which could be senior living or college, large office, grocery, or restaurant participants. Please reach out if you have a building that may be a good fit. For the electrification feasibility reports required as part of the updated permitting process, we offer incentives up to $2,500 to cover the cost of the feasibility report. Pre-approval is required to access the tool, and we now have an online training to receive pre-approval on our website. Find that and more information about EFRs at newdaynewcode.com. And lastly, we will have prescriptive equipment incentives in the coming weeks for commercial and multifamily housing, intended to cover the incremental cost of electrification. Be on the lookout for those, and you can always find more information on our electrification programs at denvergov.org/building electrification. Now I'll pass it off to my colleague, Mac Prather, to talk a little bit about our residential program offerings.
Thank you, Sam. If you're a homeowner or a renter and you're in Denver, first of all, we're really glad you're here. We want to make sure you're aware of a couple of programs that are related to the heat pumps we're going to be talking about today. First is our Healthy Homes pilot. This is a limited pilot for lower income folks in the City and County of Denver living with chronic respiratory conditions. If you know anybody that might qualify for this, please reach out. Please follow the information on this slide, which will go out after the presentation. We'd love to get those folks into the program and speak with them. We also have rebates available for equipment for anyone in the City and County of Denver. If you're here today to learn about heat pump, Shawn is going to go really into the details, going to help learn everybody up about cold climate heat pumps. And if you're interested in that, be sure you're talking to your contractor, your installer, about the rebates from Denver and the utility rebates, which are available from Xcel Energy. This information on Denver's program is available on our website. Go to www.denvergov.org/home energy. Rebate information, contact information for the program, and some basic education on heat pumps is there. We'd love to have your participation in that program. And again, just glad you're here today.
Thanks, Mac, for that overview. And as a reminder, for additional resources on Denver's electrification programs, please check out our website, www.denvergov.org/building electrification, where you will find information on code changes, incentives, electrification feasibility reports, home energy rebates, and more. Our question and answer session today will focus on Shawn's presentation. So please do email us at electrification@denvergov.org if you have any questions regarding the city's electrification programs or requirements. And lastly, I want to encourage you all to check out our webinar library, where you can register for upcoming events, such as our training series on the 2022 Denver Energy Code, watch past webinars, and see other resources. This is where the recording of this webinar will be posted later this week. We would love your input on future webinar topics, and we welcome requests to speak at webinars as well. You can click the Suggest a Webinar Topic or Request to Speak at a Webinar link on the bottom of the page to submit feedback. I'll post the links in the chat as well. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Shawn LeMons. Shawn is part of the performance construction team with Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC, focused on efficient cooling and heating systems for residential new construction and high performance modeling. He has held certifications as a lead green rater, FIAS Plus verifier, HERS rater, BPI professional, ICC residential energy inspector, level 1 thermographer, and earned a BS in business from the University of Colorado at Boulder. He has 25 years of experience in the residential building industry with small and large companies, nonprofits, and volunteer work. Since 2009, he has completed analysis and advising on over 7 million square feet of residential and commercial buildings. He enjoys sharing that knowledge for all levels of building professionals, for which we are very thankful today. Shawn, take it away.
Perfect. Well, a big thank you to Samantha and Mac and the Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency team in Denver. I'm looking forward to this, so I'm going to jump right in. All right, so we're going to cover a few topics. We're looking, oh, I just realized that I forgot one last button. All right. Share, and you would think after doing this for so long that I would be able to get this done. So not coming through?
We see it. You're good.
Okay, cool. Okay, so topics: how heat pumps work, cold climate examples. We're going to talk about some energy and market changes and some field data I've collected and some best practices. First off, what do heat pumps do? Now, I don't want to oversimplify this, but we got to start from the beginning and just talk about the fact that heat pumps pump heat to where you want it. So in the summer, they pump heat out of a building, and in the winter, they pump heat into a building. And the same applies for hot water, etc., pumping it into the tank where you want that heat. And so thinking about sort of segmenting the air source heat pump categories, we've got 3 columns, and I've included the furnace and AC split systems there because the AC is technically a heat pump. It pumps heat to where you want it, which is outside the house in the summer. But a true heat pump will pump it forward and backwards, or into the house in the winter and out of the house in the summer. Now we're going to take those heat pumps, we're going to split them up into 2 categories. I'm going to refer to them as traditional heat pumps and inverter or variable capacity heat pumps. So that center section there, it just talks about some of the details. And on those traditional systems, the key component that we're talking about there is that these are typically 1 or 2 speed systems. Maybe there's more speeds, but those start to perform at the higher performance levels closer to variable speed. And on the inverter side, the variable speed systems, they're able to ramp up and work harder as they need to deliver the heat in the house in the winter and do the work for cooling in the summer. And higher efficiencies, higher capacities, a wider range of capacities, smaller sizes up to larger sizes as well. And critically, those cold climates, cold temperatures that we're talking about. So really that inverter allows that system to sort of come up to speed and come up to temperature and maintain that over sort of a low and slow approach, sort of like think of a crock pot or just a set it and forget it kind of a number or a capability. And this translates into a more efficient system, because once it's sort of at temperature and maintaining, it's only using the energy that it needs to at that moment. There's decisions that it's making on the back end to do that, but it's not this off on short cycle or power and drift kind of approach that a 1 or 2 speed system will take. And so what does that get us? That allows us to see capacities of those systems be maintained into colder temperature ranges without giving up comfort, without giving up that extra heat. So they'll maintain, for us at Mitsubishi, that means 100% down to 5 degrees. Some equipment is starting to come out to 100% capacity down to -5. As opposed to sort of that standard or traditional heat pump that starts to drop off at the 40 or 30 or 20 degree range, and we see those loss in capacities. And that standard or that traditional system, that occupies most of the market. That's where most of the equipment is. And so when you hear the story that heat pumps don't work when it gets cold, they're really talking about the traditional equipment that is maybe limited experience on the part of the person, or they just don't have access to the equipment that does the cold climate. These are purpose built for cold weather. You can't just apply a traditional heat pump to a cold climate application and expect the same result. So how do we identify those pieces of equipment? You're going to be looking at mostly lists from NEAP, their cold climate heat pump list. There's Energy Star list as well, and both of those are going to feed into when all the testing is done, the AHRI directory, and those links are at the bottom. But there's some key details here. NEAP and others look at cold climate equipment as having 70% of its capacity at 5 degrees. So the 47 degrees is sort of this regular testing number that they're looking at. What's the capacity at 47? And then there's actually this intermediate 17 degree test point. And now there's a new test point down at 5 degrees. They want to see 70% of the capacity available at 5 degrees. Now, that's according to this cold climate guidelines and criteria. Manufacturers are going to look at it a little bit differently in the context of what they are able to do. Mitsubishi and others such as Daikin and Fujitsu and LG and Samsung, they all have, and there are others, they all have their own true cold climate capable, well below 0 degree equipment. So you have to be careful and double check your specs on that. And one of the ways to do that is to use a software tool that's available from the manufacturer. They are out there. And there's a lot on this slide. I'm not going to go through it all, but you're going to see those sort of red highlighted areas. That tool allows you to put together a system, identify that the pieces work together, that you are able to, and on the right side, you'll see that red highlight. You're able to hit those capacities to meet your manual S requirement for manual J or other load calculation requirements. And then on the left side, we're also identifying, we're doing that math, we're doing that work to determine those capacities at those design conditions. So in this case, we're double checking that this system is able to operate down to -12 degrees outdoor dry bulb. And we're also looking at refrigerant charge, which is helpful for the installer, and also impact on costs and bidding and climate impact and carbon counting, et cetera. So double check the capabilities of the system. Don't just assume that a traditional heat pump will do the work for you at cold temperatures, and don't assume that all cold climate equipment will do the job at the temperatures that you need them to do it. So really, we're looking at a Goldilocks principle. We're looking at, we're not too small, we're not too big, we're just right. Without going into detail, when they're too small, we're looking at systems that are obviously not able to keep up with the set point of the house. We're looking at using extra backup heat, extra heat strips, or what have you. They're slow to catch up if there is a thermostat setback. And we have poor energy efficiency because it's got to run extra hard at those lower temperatures. On the flip side, oversizing, which is a common practice in the industry still, because a lot of folks are still not quite familiar with the math, or they don't want to take the time to do the math. When a system is oversized, you're looking at compromising comfort and efficiency, system durability, and adding costs. And when I say system durability, I think a lot of folks on this webinar will recognize that when a motor starts and stops, that's its most impactful time frame, when it's starting up. These systems they have a smoother start, so it's we have a longer lifespan generally, but we still want to get the sizing right so we can hit the comfort, the efficiency, durability long term, and deliver on the promises that someone's paying for this better equipment. There's a great guide out there from NEEP. This is one of my favorite documents out there, the Air Source Heat Pump Buying Guide. And within that document, it also refers to, on the bottom half of the screen there, you'll see getting the most out of your heat pump. And there's a link to another document that it's, once you've bought it, what do you do to maintain it? So some good guidance in those two documents. And so now let's dig in a little bit more of a deep dive into how heat pumps work. We're looking at, on the left side, we're looking at water as an example, right? So we freeze water into ice to do certain types of work, and we boil water into steam to do certain types of work. And that phase change is where that hidden heat is found. So there's actually hidden heat in ice, and there's lots of hidden heat in steam. Well, refrigerants work sort of the same. So as we move the refrigerant around that circuit from the blue or cold side, we'll call that the outdoor unit where the heat is collected. We're managing the temperature and pressure of that refrigerant so it boils at that outdoor temperature. And then as it boils, it absorbs that heat into the phase change, into the vapor. That vapor then gets compressed and pushed inside the house. That heat, there's a fan that blows across the coil there, and that hidden heat is then delivered into the house. So it's not just a change in temperature, but it's a change in the amount of energy in the refrigerant from phase change of when it turns into a vapor, and then when it turns back into a liquid. So once that heat is given up in the house, then it starts to return back to outside. It goes through an expansion valve. When those gases expand, they cool off. And when it cools off, we're just managing the level that it cools off to, which is down below outdoor air temperature, and the cycle starts again. So, okay, that's great for a heat pump, but how do we get heat out of those really cold temperatures? And I apologize for the eye chart here. The point is not to look too closely at this, just to identify that there's additional equipment here. If you look around that cycle, you'll see those little sort of target-shaped items. Those target-shaped items, little circles and X's, those are additional expansion valves. And so it's not just one, it's actually not just four. There's multiple expansion valves within these systems. And that's designed to better manage the temperature and pressure and heat absorption and rejection with the refrigerant. And so that within that gold circle, it's an additional piece of equipment that really captures the waste heat that's leaving the indoor. So if we didn't use all the heat available on the indoor unit, We're going to capture what was sort of left over as best we can. And we're going to use that to our benefit to make the system more efficient and do better, more and better work when it's really cold outside. So examples and sort of facing the challenge of do heat pumps really work when it's cold? Yes, they really work when it's cold. So left side, I met a gentleman by the name of Joe. He's in Fraser. He's like, yep, my system operates down to negative below, and he's had it installed for the past 7 years, going on 8 years actually. On the right side, Joe and Kristen in Fraser, they're up at 8,800 feet elevation. They installed this into a competition house. And that house is actually part of the Solar Decathlon competition. And that Solar Decathlon is actually going on this week. This is an older home, obviously, a couple years old, but that competition is going on this week at NREL, National Renewable Energy Labs. And so I'm going to go see some friends there later this week, but they haven't needed to turn on their backup heat in that house. They built that house to be a race car to win, and they won. So they've been net zero without backup heat in Fraser all year. Another project, one of my favorites down in Salida, or near Salida, it's actually Nathrop. Greg Fillet is a great builder down there, and he texted me one morning with some photos, said it was negative 22 on my truck dashboard this morning. I went inside and it was still 68, 69 degrees. So that's a great testament as well. Down in the valley, down where that cold air sits in the valley, it's a great example and a beautiful spot. So let's sort of move beyond just kind of these onesie-twosie and talk about the press that heat pumps are getting. So this is Colorado Sun, and there's some great folks in this, highlighted in this article, folks that we get to work with. And a quote here, overall, so it was December 22nd. It was obviously really cold that day in the Front Range, negative 18 for these folks. And the quote is, overall, it was just another day. It was not much of an event. It was working nearly full time during that cold snap, but the house remained comfortable. Now, keep in mind that we don't really design home systems to operate at that cold and maintain set point. But with a little padding, with a little good design, good effort, we're going to be able to get there. Here's a great video on YouTube about a retirement community in Ontonagon, Michigan. It gets very cold there. So 60 units, 15 buildings, retired folks, fixed income, and they went with cold climate heat pumps and 25 below zero temperatures, and not a single tenant had any issue or even needed to turn on their electric resistance back up. They did have electric in the house. That's what was there before. And they chose this equipment, this technology to save just a ton of money for these fixed income folks. And they got some help from the utility and from the community to get that done, which I think is well spent. And how about the New York Times, right? So we're hearing lots of national press. So as heat pumps go mainstream, can they handle the real cold? And yes, they can. By the way, that photo is from Denver. So I thought that was a fun one to reference there. But it just shows, the working conditions for some of these folks, it's not where I would want to work. I mean, this is hard work. So we have to give props to these technicians, these individuals that are out there every day pushing the envelope to make this happen for us. So let's transition now to talking about energy. And so the left side is showing the cost or the price volatility of electric prices and natural gas prices. And yeah, we're seeing the cost of energy go up over time. But I think what's important here is looking at the volatility of the natural gas in the orange line versus lesser volatility of the cost of electric. And just in my personal utility bills, these are January bills from 2021, 2022, and 2023. And you can see that price per therm increase, 141% increase over those 3 years. And the electric rates, yes, they did increase, but not to the same extent. And I can get more done with that electric because I've been able to optimize my house with some air sealing, some insulation, some windows, nothing major. I've actually converted almost entirely to all electric in my house, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Heating fuels. So they are, as we look back, this is 2000 to 2020. So 20 years of data here. This is looking at residential new construction in multifamily and residential new construction in single family homes. So if you notice, the electricity is gaining ground in terms of equipment deployed in those new buildings, in those new homes, in both sides. And while they're not at the same levels, they are clearly showing that electric equipment is what's happening, and natural gas is waning. So why is that? Well, I think one of the things that allows this to happen is that buildings are changing, building shells, building codes, they are changing, they are dropping. So you see this precipitous drop from 2006 energy code down to 2012 energy code. And that was a major, I think, surprise for a lot of the folks in the building industry. It's a necessary change. We forgot to keep up with some of the improvements that people had talked about, for decades past. But now we've been able to sort of reposition ourselves, and we're forecasting a significant movement towards this net zero concept. Where within those two dashed lines we're going to end up, I'm not sure. I personally hope that we are closer to the bottom of that, moving towards net zero by 2050. But to be determined for sure. The point is, buildings are changing and allowing this technology to be deployed. And for those that are not familiar with this chart shows that AHRI is the American Heating Refrigeration Institute, and they track HVAC sales nationally. And what I want to show you here is this inflection point that heat pumps have now outsold furnaces for the past couple of years. Now, this is pretty new information for most people, but clearly the market is turning towards this technology to do beneficial things, right? It's part of this beneficial electrification. Now, here's the key thing. Heat pumps can not only heat, but they can cool as well. So eventually the dotted blue line at the top is going to be where heat pumps end up. And so heat pumps are going to take over roughly that 14 million systems per year that you see represented on this chart. It is where we're going, and it's because it's better in almost every way. There are challenges, we will talk about that, but the market is reflecting this change. And it's not just the United States, but in fact, the United States is behind the rest of the world in terms of adoption of this technology. And it mostly has to do with our housing type and housing stock and equipment available. But clearly, the rest of the world has adopted variable capacity heat pumps as a useful technology. And now manufacturers across the world are starting to look at the United States and say, oh, wow, there's a major market opportunity here. There's a major transition to deploy this technology that we've developed over the past decades, and we continue to improve. So that's pretty exciting to see some new equipment and opportunities coming to our shores. So let's step aside again and think about the installation process. What does success look like? I'm not going to go into deep dive here, but just kind of calling out the obvious of, you got to figure out where the things are going to go. We got to figure out how to best install them, position them for best performance, connect the systems. And here's two critical steps. Step 5, step 6, doing a leak test to evacuate the system, get those line sets clean and dry. When I mean dry, we have to literally boil out any impurities by putting a vacuum on those line sets. We're emptying out those line sets as best we can to very, very low near vacuum conditions. And then we release into that near vacuum environment the refrigerant that then allows that work to be transferred from inside to outside and back and forth. And then the charge test, that's really that step. And making sure that you have the right amount of refrigerant is critical. Variable capacity heat pumps have a critical charge. You have to hit that number. You can be off a little bit here and there, but think of it, it's kind of sort of standing on a bubble. At the top of the bubble is where you want to be. If you stand too far to the left or right, you're going to start to, slide off and not be in balance or being able to hit the numbers that you might need or want. Locating those outdoor units. There's a great guide online, and I've got the link there. It just talks about things to think about when locating the outdoor unit. So considering weather, wind, sun, I would say one of my favorite recommendations is let that outdoor unit see a little bit of winter sun so that sun can help manage snow and ice. You also don't want to locate that outdoor unit in a spot that's going to create a slip hazard or an ice rink, really, because there is condensation and defrost that happens at that outdoor unit. So being conscientious about where that is, not only for people, but for other things. And I would not stack those units in a cold climate. You can stack them in a warm climate. A little bit of water that's not freezing doesn't hurt the one below it if you're staying above freezing, but when that water freezes, it can certainly have a big impact on the lower unit and reduce performance. And then thinking about snow and slide and buildup and wind drifts and all that stuff, all considerations. One of my other favorite recommendations is, I know a lot of people use pads. They'll put the heat pump on a pad, sort of like an air conditioner pad. But I actually like not having the pad. I like seeing sort of tamped and placed pavers, so that when the water drips off that outdoor unit during the defrost cycle, that water can drip to ground and goes away. It reduces the buildup of ice over the season, particularly if it is in a spot where it sees winter sun. Just keep the system out of the snow shadow and allow that water to go to the right place. Also, I try to avoid vibration on framed walls. When you attach these systems that do have moving parts, they do operate at different frequencies, and it's a near guarantee that the system's going to hit a frequency, find a frequency that's going to have harmonics with that wall. So just be conscientious of that. And definitely don't oversize a standard heat pump to expect it to work like a cold climate heat pump. The guts are different. The operation algorithms are a little bit different. The functionality is the same, but there are better capabilities. Think of it like a vehicle with all-wheel drive versus front or rear-wheel drive. It's just a better product for driving around in a slippery space. All right, so really that's checklists, right? Checklist manifesto, however you want to look at it, but just consider double checking your work at each installation, making sure you're hitting all the points. A critical step is just making sure that you hit all the steps and not miss something, because that's the number one thing. Without double checking things or following the guidelines, that's what brings installers back to jobs unprofitably and sets up frustration and confusion and creates unhappy customers in the market. And so use those checklists, double check your work. All right, so a little bit of reflection on my house. I have a heat pump. I have a dual fuel system in my house. It was a test. It was a test case as part of a national study. And just these are the final points here. So I've been able to operate at an average COP of 3, that's coefficient of performance. And that means that roughly my system's operating about 300% efficient, or 1 unit of energy in versus 3 units of energy out. So that's pretty efficient over heating season. Over 12 months of both heating and cooling, I've been able to operate my house for about $600 and reduce natural gas heating by 95%. And actually, the system can handle all the heating, but because it's a test case, I had a hard changeover from heat pump to gas at 9 degrees. So anytime it was below 9 degrees, I had to run that furnace a little bit, which for folks that need that particular design detail, it is absolutely a good idea, right? So having a dual fuel system is a solution for most of the homes in our city and in our country. But as those homes improve over time, as they add insulation, air sealing, windows, and other details to make them more efficient, then I think we are going to get to a place where almost every home is going to be able to operate comfortably, effectively, efficiently on a heat pump. And I also did a deeper dive. This is pretty geeky here, but stick with me for a minute. I have an energy monitor on my house, and it monitors various circuits. And I was curious, how much power am I using? What's my amperage? I have a 100 amp breaker box on my home from the mid-90s, and I monitored 70,000 1-minute periods, right? So that's 1,175 hours of data monitoring over this past winter. And I found out that my max amperage on my house with almost all electric equipment, appliances and such, a heat pump and a EV, and I'm maxing out at 57 amps. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should stop upgrading their panels. I'm not saying that we shouldn't put in the right size panels. I'm saying that if you are in a pinch, do the math, check your monitoring. Let's figure out how to get this done without necessarily having to upgrade all these panels, right? It's the right application when necessary. And I want to point out too that there were 73 minutes out of 70,000 minutes that the amperage was within 90% of that 57. So not only isn't it a problem, it's almost always not a problem, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So I figured out that I can add that that I can add the heat pump water heater, not electric resistance, and that I can utilize my 30 amp EV charging circuit, which is partnered with my dryer. When my dryer runs, it gets the power, and the rest of the time I have available for my EV, and I charge my EV at about 10 to 15 amps. So I can very easily charge both vehicles on 30 amps as needed, maintain our daily driving. And when we go on road trips or longer distances, that's what superchargers are for. So I'll leave you with some thoughts or things to remember. Identify and utilize the resources out there, right? So I do trainings as a manufacturer. I work with distributors and other trainers around this technology. Learning, I always learn from others that have been successful with this, and that's my suggestion to you, is learn from others who are successful with this. Using the tools that are available, the design software, the professionals that are available to use that software or guide you through the process, and using the right tools for the job, right? So using vacuum pumps that can do a slow drawdown of vacuum, using a nitrogen pressure system that can a pump that can go to 600 psi, for example, not just 300 or 350 or 400, because these systems operate at these higher levels. Find the right tools for the job. Get your flare fittings correct. And partnering with programs, whether they be national or local, utility or municipality, etc. Use these incentives as leverage to stay competitive and take advantage of this dramatic new market that we have and opportunity that we have in front of us. And build forward. So I like this phrase, build like the future depends on it. And this is from my friends at 475. They're a building supply company. They do amazing work. And I'll leave you with this. We all sort of stand on the shoulders of those that came before us, and think about how much work, how much effort, how much focused resource it took to be able to take this picture. This is actually a snapshot of a video from space, right? This is such a cool thing, and we take it for granted today because we did all that work in the past. We took the time, we did the math, we worked with other people to get to a point where we could reflect upon ourselves from this perspective. And I would invite you to consider that I think we can do this in our society in a way that we don't have to burn fossilized sunlight every day to run our world. And with that, I want to say thanks. Appreciate the time. Oh, wait, one more. I love this one. was a little out of sequence there. There's a lot of work that was done. We have the precedents to do the work that's necessary. From 1935 to 1949, 14 years, we moved rural America from 10% electricity to 70% electricity. 14 years, all that work, all that resource, all that labor, focused effort, people working together. Oh, and by the way, we fought a world war during that time as well. So yes, I know we can get this done. I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Shawn, for a wonderful presentation. We've been getting good questions in the chat, so please continue to add your questions. But just to start us off, we have from Aiden and another attendee. Does an air source heat pump provide similar efficiencies for cooling compared to traditional units? Are there cooling trade-offs or losses in efficiency with cold climate heat pumps?
Yeah, so the quick answer is if we consider cold climate heat pump to be an inverter-based system, which is inherently more efficient because it ramps up and then maintains. That happens in heating and in cooling. So we're going to see cooling efficiencies being higher generally for inverter-based cold climate heat pumps. Not entirely, it's not a guarantee, but that's part of the specification. So if you're looking at, I would say our technology sort of starts at, say, the SEER 16 level and moves up. We've got some equipment that's upwards of 30, even 33 SEER. Now, I know that SEER is changing to SEER 2, but effectively the same. And there are other manufacturers that have extraordinarily efficient inverter-based systems like that.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question comes from Ishra. What are the maintenance costs once a heat pump system is in place? What are typical maintenance intervals, costs, and what is the overall lifespan of a system?
Right. So costs, intervals, and lifespan. Well, lifespan first, I'll say, for us, we engineer the systems to run for 20 to 30 years. We do factory testing on every single serial number, and we record those results per serial number, and we keep them for 30 years. So working with high quality manufacturers, you're going to get this high level of performance over time. In terms of maintenance, there's very little maintenance that's necessary if things are installed and sort of taken care of correctly. Consider it as a high reliability vehicle. They might consider a 10-year lifespan, but where people are driving them for 20 or 30, but you've got to change the oil, etc. You don't have to change the refrigerant out. The refrigerant can stay in there indefinitely. You just don't want it to leak out. It just stays in a closed loop process. Really, all you're talking about is changing filters on your indoor unit where the air flows across the coil. Keep yourself healthy and keep the nasties out of the air and change those filters. It also helps the system last longer and be more efficient over time because that debris is not building up on those coils. We, as manufacturers, we're doing things to help with that by putting on something called the dual barrier coating, and that definitely assists and lengthens the kind of the high efficiency operable service time. But it's important to change your filters and keep the outdoor unit clean. I would say don't let debris build up on it if it's dusty, and I certainly suggest having a good trustworthy service technician that you like come and take a look at the system every year. I wouldn't even call it a tune-up. I would say, a once-over. It's sort of like a checkup, if you will.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question comes from Lance. From what I've seen, when you get down to negative 13 degrees Fahrenheit, heat load drops such that you might need a 4 to 5 ton unit, whereas only a 1 to 2 ton unit is needed for cooling. Is it efficient to oversize your unit by 2 to 3 tons on the cooling side just to cover heating at the coldest temperatures?
Fantastic question. I think it was Lance. And given those numbers, I'm guessing you might be in the mountains, Lance, where we have less cooling, but still some. In the Front Range, we typically see cooling to be about 2/3 of the heating load. That's not a guarantee. Every house is a little different. But to answer your question, there's one major upside of these pieces of equipment is that they are the variable ability of them to operate at a lower temperature, turning down to, say, not only 50, but 40, 30, 20% of the rated capacity. So they have the ability to run extraordinarily efficient in cooling to cover that cooling load while still sizing for the heating. But if your design temperature is -13, then yeah, I would look at it's a good chance you're going to need a little bit of backup, because the systems will, the right systems, good systems will operate past that -13. Like I said early on, the gentleman, his system's operating at -30, -25, -22. So in those scenarios, we're adding a little bit of heat, not a lot of heat. So that's on sort of a general sort of block load comparison. But there's another strategy too, if you can separate the systems floor by floor, right? So if you can put a dedicated system taking care of all the bedrooms, bathrooms, closets upstairs, for example, and then the great room or large spaces down below, or even if you've got bedrooms or basement or what have you, if you're able to separate those compressors out, now you can heat from below with an efficient heat pump, and the upper one can be off or just circulating air, and vice versa in the summer. So now in the summer, you're cooling the top of the space, dedicated set point driven cooling, and it benefits the bottom of the house and just circulating the air, and the system can be low or off as well. So it's about the proper design and thinking about it and thinking about minimums and maximum capacities and not oversizing. You're asking the right question.
Perfect. Our next question related from Deborah. She says, I live in Durango and do not need AC in the summer, only heat in the winter. My forced air gas furnace needs to be replaced. Is a heat pump worth it since I do not need the AC feature?
Yeah, Deborah, another great question. Heat pumps also cool. So it's sort of, you get it for free, I guess. You don't have to rent it. And every bit of energy that you don't use is the most efficient energy out there for sure. Is it worth it? I mean, I think that's going to depend on which systems you're looking at, the cost of systems. If maybe your furnace still has a little bit of life left in it, and you could put on a, well, I don't know, putting a dual fuel coil on if you don't need AC. But another strategy would be maybe extend the life of the furnace by putting a heat pump in place to take care of most of the heat, right? And I'm not sure that applies to you, but if you can knock off 50, 80, 90% of the heat just by putting in a system, and now you're a heat pump that can handle almost all of your heating, and then just run the furnace when you really need it for those extreme temperatures. Now you can reduce the cost and complexity of that system, because cold climate heat pumps do cost a little bit more. I've heard or seen numbers anywhere from 10 to 30% more, because they are more complex. So there might be savings. You might be able to extend the life of that system out, but it just depends. Talk with your HVAC professional about that.
Perfect. The next question comes from Joan and Heidi. It's a fairly complex calculation to understand the load that a new heat pump will take for regarding your electricity usage. What resources would you recommend can be referred to clients or the contractors and folks in the solar industry or otherwise can use to estimate new load with a heat pump? Is there a simple tool to get an estimate load for your home?
Great question. It is a complex calculation, but it's not hard. The math isn't hard, and there are tools out there. I mean, it's really multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. It's nothing. There are algorithms built in to do that math, but those software tools out there. I hesitate on naming any particular one, but some of them are professional level and very expensive, and some of them are free online tools. I will say that the free online and the simplified ones tend to oversimplify the inputs. So you have to be thoughtful about the inputs, but there are great tools online that you can use yourself, or have someone use, someone that's savvy with sort of determining the inputs. And so, for example, if it only gives you an option for an R13 wall, and you have a house built in the past few years, and you might have an R20 wall, then it's going to overstate your load, right? If it's assuming windows from the 1970s, but you replaced your windows in the past 10 years or what have you, then it's going to overstate your loads. So be thoughtful about the inputs, learn a little bit about what does this mean? Click on those little circled eyes for information, and just do a quick search online to understand a little bit more about what's going on there. I'm not advocating necessarily doing it for you. You're asking about professionals who can do this for you. And I definitely would advise that because of the nuances involved. And I would look at some energy auditors will do load calcs. Many HVAC companies I want to say this correctly, but HVAC companies should know how to do this, and some of them do know how to do it, and many of them just don't because it takes time, and so they don't do it. Or they'll do sort of some napkin math to get in the ballpark. And to be fair, I love a good rule of thumb. I live by rules of thumb my whole life, but you have to update your thumb. You have to update the rule to match the scenario you're in. You can't use old rules of thumb to apply to a new situation. So I don't know if I answered your question, but there are resources out there. Check with the utility company, do a search online, check with the local energy efficiency organizations in your area that can advise a little bit on that. And just ask the question to the professionals, the HVAC professionals, if they do their own load calcs or HERS raters. HERS raters are a great resource. Not all of them do load calcs, but they usually have connections to them. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Shawn. Our next question comes from Joanne about your home project. She asks, you were able to keep your existing furnace? All my quotes came in with new gas furnace and new ductwork to go with a heat pump.
Yeah, that sort of follows the same storyline of if the HVAC professionals are not comfortable, first off, they don't want the phone call. They don't want the call saying the system isn't working as expected. So they're going to lean towards larger and less risk of not keeping you warm when it's cold, right? I totally get that. I understand that. I wouldn't want that phone call either. But I think as time goes, we will start to see building professionals, HVAC professionals, will understand that the technology is mature and it's able to do the work that needs to be done with good design and installation. Now, beyond that, it might be true that your house needs that extra bit of heat. Maybe it's just a larger heat load. And there's all sorts of reasons why that might be. And so a dual fuel system could be an absolute right fit for you. And like I said before, if you can knock off 80 or 90 or 95% of the gas use through the furnace, then absolutely go for it. That's a win. I'll take 50% reduction of fossil fuels every day, no problem. But just being thoughtful about it, proper application. It's hard. My house is 1,700 square feet, and it's relatively efficient for the mid-90s build. And I'm able to get that done with a mid-sized heat pump. So yes, it's doable. Just gotta dig into the details, I guess.
Continuing on that theme, Raina asks, what resources would you recommend for contractors? I've spoken with a lot of contractors who really undersell the benefits of heat pumps and aren't particularly interested in installing them. It would be great to know who to trust for good and informed recommendations on systems.
Sure. as there are a lot of resources. Sort of back to the distributor, the mention of the distributors. Great distributors are going to have training resources on this technology. So there's a chance that if you're not getting sort of good uptake or good recommendations, that those professionals haven't gone through that training. So maybe I mean, shoot, you could call a distributor and find out, who their favorite contractors are. They will tell you. You can go on to manufacturer websites and look for, we have a zip code search, for example. You could type in your zip code, you're going to get a list of qualified contractors that have gone through training and followed, sort of the program rules, and you should be getting, good results from that list. And even on those lists, sometimes the individual technicians or individual salespeople still shy away from recommending me because it's just an old paradigm. It's an old shift. Other resources for them, use that NEAP buyer's guide. Grab I'll provide a PDF for this, and you can actually just search online NEAP heat pump buyer's guide. And that's a fantastic document, and it can provide you some questions to ask when you're calling around. And, to be fair, it is an emerging technology in the market. We cover probably 15%, maybe even 20% of the market, but it's still in transition, and we're still, moving up the adoption curve, and that takes extra work and extra time and details to look at. I don't know if I'd answered your question, but I hope so.
Thanks, Shawn. Our next question comes from Alicia and Patrick. Is there a general best practice around recommending heat pumps in the commercial space, or does it vary based on facility size and sector? Does the information you presented today apply to heat pumps that would be installed to replace a gas boiler in, for example, a condo tower?
The short answer is yes. It's the same technology, the same capabilities, but it's in a different package, different implementation. We have all the manufacturers that I mentioned before, Daikin, Fujitsu, LG, as well as the major manufacturers, Trane, Lennox, Daikin, Goodman, Carrier. They all have equipment that's going to be able to do this work. To be fair, most of the majors that have been sort of invested in the furnace AC paradigm and the gas paradigm, natural gas paradigm, they are rapidly adopting and rapidly testing new equipment. So if you don't see it now, there's a good chance you're going to see it soon. But I will take an opportunity to share that Mitsubishi has been at the forefront of that, and we have equipment out there that's been able to do that for a decade or so now, and we could basically do any building in Denver. So the technology is out there. Got to look a little bit further for it, and look for the commercial resources. And in the same way that if you need a vehicle repair or purchasing a vehicle, you're not going to go to if you want a Lexus, you're not going to go to a Mercedes dealer, right? If you want a repair on your Toyota, you're not going to go to a Ford mechanic. You want the person to work on your system that loves that system, because that's where the best practices are at. I would not try to shoehorn a particular ask for someone that's just not really into it, because I just don't think that's the best path.
Thanks, Shawn. And maybe one last quick question before we wrap up for today. What are the costs, rough estimate, of cold climate and traditional heat pumps?
I cut out there for a second. Say it again. I'm sorry.
What are the costs? Like, what's a rough estimate of the cost of a cold climate or traditional heat pump?
Yeah, so I mentioned before, roughly 10 to 30% more for the cold climate. As a manufacturer, I can't speak to absolute dollars. I can talk in terms of list prices and what I've seen in the market. I will say that costs have gone up recently, and HVAC technicians, the industry is very busy. And when you're very, very busy, you're not, you're getting the cost, the price that you're asking for. And so as those prices go up, it's changed pretty dramatically. But the, operating costs have gone up as well, cost of fuel to drive around all over the place, and cost of insurance and employee costs, et cetera, and so on. They've all gone up. So I will say that, yeah, it's such a slippery slope on installed costs, but yeah, I think I might even back away. Well, let me rephrase it this way. I'll say that this technology, this equipment, cold climate heat pumps, can compete on mid-level priced standard equipment, and competes very well on high-end standard equipment, meaning gas furnace AC. 98% 18 SEER AC systems are we're on par or possibly even beating those systems in terms of price. But it does depend on who you're asking, because if they're not familiar with it, or they don't really want to do it, then you're going to get a higher price to sort of, sure, if you want me to do it, I'll do it, but I'm going to charge you extra for it, basically. It's always a slippery slope on price.
Of course. Well, we've reached the end of our webinar, so I want to say thank you very much to our presenter, Shawn, for a fabulous webinar. As a reminder for all of our attendees, a recording of this event will be online shortly, and we will be emailing out a copy of the presentation slides to all registrants for the event. If you have further questions for CalZER staff, a couple of us are going to be able to stay on a little longer and answer some more of the questions within the Q&A, if anybody wants to hang out with us. Otherwise, please do forward any other questions you have to electrification@denvergov.org. Thank you all so much.
Thanks so much, Samantha.